Okay, so this has been going on for a few months now, but things just went to the next level last night. I was about 6 months pregnant when this started, back in October. We had only been living in this house for about 2 or 3 months, and everything had been normal. The first few times it happened, I didn't think too much about it. I just thought it was a bird or something. The whistling always happens at night. It is one higher pitched whistle, a very short pause, and then a lower pitched whistle. I'll start with the first time I noticed there was something odd. I was probably 7 months pregnant and my dog and I were napping on the couch. For whatever reason, while I was pregnant, I would moan in my sleep. Sometimes, so loud I would wake myself up. So, I was asleep and I woke myself up moaning, and then I heard the whistling. It sounded like it was coming from the kitchen. I know I was just hearing things because the dog shot up and looked in the kitchen and his ears perked up. After that happened, I noticed that the whistling was only happening at night and I had never heard a bird or anything else make a sound during the day. It started to become more frequent, but the dog and I were the only ones that were hearing it. I told my husband about it, but he just kind of brushed it off. The second weird thing that happened was, at the end of my pregnancy, my husband and I were in bed. I was sleeping and he was watching TV. I was moaning like normal. My husband said it was getting louder and louder. Then he heard the whistling and I stopped moaning. He woke me up to tell me this. After I had my daughter in January, the whistling had pretty much stopped until the last couple of weeks. I have been hearing it almost every night on Sunday. My husband and I both heard it. Last night, after my husband got home from work, he took the dog outside. We have a very long and narrow patch of trees directly across the road from our house. I was in the house. The windows were open but the curtains were closed, so I could hear but not see. So, according to my husband, the dog was peeing and really focused on a patch of trees. And then he saw a cat, but the cat was stalking something in the trees. After the dog was done peeing, he took off. At first, my husband thought it was the cat, but something shot out of the trees. In the house, I heard claws on the pavement. First, really fast ones, then obvious strides of our dog. I heard my husband yell for the dog to come back. When they came in the house, it looked as if my husband had seen a ghost. He said that whatever came out of the trees was pretty big. About as big as our dog, who is a Doberman Pinscher about 110 pounds, on all fours. It ran so fast that he said that he wasn't paying attention and probably would have missed it if he wasn't looking. It looked more like a human, though, that was on all fours. It was dark in color and jumped in the air and disappeared. All last night, the dog did not want to be alone. Usually he sleeps on the couch, but my husband had to throw him out on the bed. This morning, my husband went outside to the trees to see if there was any obvious spot where this thing was been living. Went over to check it out. Our neighbor, whose yard backs up to the trees, came outside when my husband told him there was something big there last night. And the neighbor said, "Oh, it won't hurt nothing." I can't help but to think of this creature and the whistling are related. If anyone can help me figure out what it is, it would be greatly appreciated. The Lummi Indian Reservation is in the inland northwest corner of Washington, 8 miles west of Bellingham and 20 miles south of the Canadian border in western Whatcom County. After receiving several reports of Sasquatch sighting on the Lummi Nation Indian Reservation, Lummi Police Sergeant Ken Cooper was called to the residence of 78-year-old Emma Smith on the night of October 23 of 1975. She reported a Bigfoot attempt to break into her house, and she had fled in terror. Sergeant Cooper found the plastic of the storm door had been torn, and the door's wooden frame splintered. Boards had also been torn from a nearby smokehouse, but he could not find the creature nor any person. He returned to the residence around 2:30 a.m., shining the spotlight from his patrol car into the woods. He found a group of 7 people already there, with their own spotlight set directly on a huge, 7.5-foot tall, hairy creature. Cooper aimed his 12-gauge shotgun at the creature. Concerned that it would be a human in a costume, he yelled, "If there's somebody just fooling around, you better knock it off, because we have weapons." The creature just crouched down. As Sergeant Cooper stepped forward, the creature lowered himself down even further, until only his head was showing above the brush. For 20 minutes, Sergeant Cooper and the other people stared down the crouching hairy creature, until they heard noises in the brush to the right. People said that they were seeing more Bigfoots there. At that point, Cooper decided it was time for them to leave the scene. He returned to the location after dawn and found bare footprints in the forest-covered ground. He measured the footprints and they were 18 inches long and 7 inches wide. Over the coming weeks, the Lummi Tribal Police received over 100 reports of sightings of Bigfoot creatures. Sergeant Cooper himself saw Bigfoots 2 more times shortly after the first encounter. A veteran hunter from Maple Falls, Washington, named Such, was scout hunting areas while south of the Canadian border on the U.S. side, due west of NF 3140, but somewhere east of the South Pass Road. Stopping to rest, he was sitting up against a tree off of a well-worn game trail, waiting and resting. He was sitting in complete camouflage gear, listening to something walking up from behind. He said he sat frozen because it was too lag sounding. He could hear it breathe. His heart was pounding in his chest for more time than he said he cared to admit, because he was there, and there was no trail behind him. Such never did see whatever made the crashing footsteps in the brush behind him. Finally, another hunter walked up on the game trail in front of him, and as the man walked past him with his pack and rifle, Such hollered out, "Hello?" scaring the other hunter nearly to death. Such realized he scared the fellow hunter because he jumped sideways and asked him if he wanted to sit down with him, welcoming the company of another hunter, who said he was from Nooksack, Washington area. The Nooksack man sat down, and of course the conversation told Such that he had encountered something that he had never seen before in those woods, which is why he was so nervous. He had tracked this something up near where Such had been sitting around, and Such figured that was why he was heard passing behind him earlier moments before. The Nooksack man never did say what he thought he saw, only that it was covered with hair like a bear and maybe 8 to 9 feet tall, huge and walking on 2 legs like a man walks. He said it was no bear, of that I am sure. From the description, Such thought it was a Sasquatch, and he told the Nooksack man what he thought the man had saw, and then he went quiet. He got up and left and went back down the game trail. He never get this man to see or ever meet him again. The informants. A man and his wife were not too far from me camping in the summer of 2000, and during their stay they were experiencing some rather frightful events. The reason they contacted me was because they had come across a sighting, and because theirs happened so close to where mine was, they wanted to talk to me. They were camping for 2 weeks, and during this time their food was being taken, and even some clothes were missing. They thought maybe coyotes or even bears, but one morning, after hearing something in the campsite during the night, they woke up to find everything else tossed around the campsite. Even the guy's boat on the trailer was moved a few feet. One night in particular, something hit the side of the window and broke it, and in the morning they found a large rock sitting there in the dirt. On another night, they said it sounded like a few people were on the outside their trailer, mumbling. Jill said it was like someone had their mouth full of food. I pictured a picture of a Sasquatch eating all their food and trying to talk to each other. After that morning, they cleaned up and had breakfast when Jill had noticed bare footprints just off the side of their camper, and they said it was obvious to them by the size of the prints that their visitor during the night had to be a Sasquatch, nothing else. It said that the prints were around 18 inches long. The man put his size 12 foot inside the print, and there were still 5 or so inches more than in his in length. They told me that a couple days later, they were out in the boat fishing and actually saw this thing in their campsite while they were out on the boat. Apparently, it was throwing their stuff around and making a mess of things. The couple described a Sasquatch as a reddish brown, with long arms and a funny-shaped head. They believed it to be a male because of its bulk, size, and height, which they said was about 7 to 8 feet tall. I asked if it could have been a bear, and they both replied, "As God is our witness, what we saw was a Sasquatch." After describing the arms, legs, and head and all, there was nothing else it could have been. Personally, judging by their body language and the way they were trembling while talking to me, I believe them 100%, no doubt whatsoever. The older couple said they waited in their boat for a while until they were certain it was gone. As fast as they could, they chucked everything into their camper and left the area, only packing up properly when they got to town, where they ended up staying in the night. My name is X. I'm an 8-year veteran of the U.S. Army with a clearance to loose, so please keep my name out. Sometime in 2001, my now ex-wife and I were driving towards Scranton, Pennsylvania on Highway 81. It was late at night. My wife and I were talking to help break the monotony. I had just noticed a very dark object leaning over the edge of the road as we drove past. We passed extremely close to the object, close enough for me to feel the shock to see a very large, hairy section of wall, muscled leg, and big, hairy wrist, and a hand as the creature turned and strode to walk the embankment as we passed. The area we were driving through was through a mountainous area of the Pennsylvania section. The incline he had to have gone down several hundred feet at a sharp angle. My wife screamed and grabbed me. I slammed on the brakes and reached for my 20-gauge mag shotgun. My wife screamed again and hysterically told me no way in hell was I getting out of the car. I tried my best to tell her, hey, I'm combat trained, I have a weapon, I just have to see what the hell it was. But she would have none of it and kept freaking out. In disgust, I drove off mad at the world for letting me get a tiny glimpse of one of the world's greatest mysteries. What a tease the whole thing was. I wanted to see the entire thing for myself. But what can I say? It looked like a linebacker with a serious hair issue. I would estimate it would have been at least 7 to 8 feet tall. What really surprised me was the attitude of the thing. No fear of our vehicle at all. My wife and I had both seen bear before, and agreed it was not a bear. What bear can walk down an incline on his hind legs? I spent the rest of the trip starting out the window, wishing I had seen more of whatever it was. Recently, my husband and I traveled to Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge. We had been there a few times, and the parallel forest is our favorite place to go. But this time, something weird happened. I wanted to show my husband the stone rock circle we started. So I started walking down by the path I knew to let led to it. Then, for some reason, I found myself walking off the path to a group of trees by themselves. My husband asked where we were going since we were no longer on the path, but I just kept going. I don't know why, it was like something was drawing me in. I was filled with a scene of hopelessness. It wasn't until I was standing in the middle of a creek that I realized I hadn't been in control of myself. I brushed it off and got us back to the right trail, telling my husband I just get turned around sometimes. After seeing the stone, we headed back to the car, towards the entrance of the forest. We saw a longhorn cow. We stopped to take pictures, then it started shaking wildly, almost like it was being attacked by a hive of bees. I've grown up on farms, but I've never seen a cow move like that. Next thing I know, it started charging us. We ran for it, and the second we exited the trees, the cow just stopped, turning around and walking off. I don't know if I'm just going crazy or not, but that's weird, right? I've heard stories of stuff like that happening in these woods, but never thought they were true. But after all that, I'm really wondering about these Boar Man stories. Like, could he really be controlling animals and affecting people's thinking? Can't believe I'm asking this about the Boar Man. But I know one thing, I'm never going back into the parallel forest. I have a few stories. I don't know why things keep happening to me, but I have no reason to lie. I can't tell my stories in normal settings for fear of being branded a nut. But the following actually happened to me, and I'd love to hear from anybody who has had similar experiences. I used to work nights in a nightclub in Perth, Western Australia, and on my way home, I had to walk through a large park called Hyde Park. Hyde Park had concrete paths lined with huge Moreton Bay fig trees. They are massive trees with large roots, big enough to sit on. One night, I was walking along the path when I noticed the roots of one of the trees were shaped like a person. I thought it was cool when I got close. I knelt down to have a better look. As I bent down, the figure in the tree looked up at me. I think it was a he. I'm not 100% sure though. He was nestled in the roots of the tree and sort of appeared to be a part of it. He was kind of wet looking. At first, I thought he was the victim of a mugging or something, and I started to ask if he was alright. But before I could get the words out, I realized he was not human at all. He had a big almond-shaped eyes, cat-like I think. I guess he looked like pictures of demons of aliens. Gray is to be precise. He had a very, very kind eyes though, and I wish I had stayed to talk, but I was so freaked out that I ran without looking. The next day I went back to look at the tree and there was nothing resembling a person at all. It would be kind of a relief to me if I could write the experience off as a trick of the light or something, but I trust my senses. I saw a few strange things in the park, but that was by far the spookiest. Around January 2001, I was driving around with a friend of mine, just chatting and catching up. We decided to call it a night and drove to an area that was close to our flats that are regular parked. This was a semi-waste ground commonly called the Components Factory thanks to a light industrial area that was now defunct. Besides the local coach park. Driving alongside the road, we noticed a couple looking and pointing up at us. There was something floating above the building. At first, it literally looked like pieces of black rags that were suspended off the building. There was a noticeable gap between the roof and the rags. We parked the car and I asked my roommate to run back with me to have a closer look at what that thing was. He wasn't having any of it, he said, and wanted to go home. As peculiar as I found his lack of interest in this was, I understood that he seemed uneased about checking it out and accepted that he wasn't going to come along. I therefore ran on my own to the building to see that the couple had moved on, and that the thing was no longer on top of the building but floating parallel to the ground at the same height that it had been when I originally saw it. I was able to take a closer look at it, and here's when the story somewhat turns weird. What I saw was a floating 8 to 10 meters off the ground, height of the building plus then some. It looked for all intents and purposes like a small and long dog skull, where I could make out the snout part and the concave areas where the eyes should have been, in addition to the least small canine fang protrusion coming out at the end of the snout. The rags seemed to be made of genuine fabric, but it looked like a cross between a hood and a matted fur, and started halfway to the dog skull, and hanged loosely for less than a meter in thick clumps. Whatever it was, I could only describe it as inanimate since it was just floating. Hovering is probably a better description, away from the terminal. It made a beeline as the crow flied past a resident frog and out the nearby marina, where it went out to sea, avoiding the long mast of ships in their berths. I had to run around the building to keep up to the marina to see it float away. That was the last I ever saw of that thing, and I've never experienced anything remarkable since or before that for that matter. The next day, my friend only briefly acknowledged what we saw, whilst driving, but never wanted to know more about it. He moved out from Gibraltar to the UK shortly afterwards, not related to the incident, and haven't seen him since. I would certainly appreciate any input on what others think this may have been. I've always been fascinated by tales of cryptic water monsters, though I've never actually seen one myself. But my stepfather's father, an eccentric, yet sharp to the point individual who ordinarily isn't given to making up fanciful tales and whom I'll call Bill, once recalled a time during World War II when he was serving aboard a ship that may have been called into the English Channel. He noticed a commotion one evening on the back deck when he went to investigate. Many crewmen were carrying on. Those who happened to have cameras were eagerly snapping photos, though, conveniently, Bill didn't have one. What he claimed to have saw was something astonishing. A creature was traveling in the water in a perpendicular fashion, just slowly enough to frighten the crewmen into thinking their vessel would collide with this beast. The creature, whose long back broke the water and looked something like a crocodile's, had its head held out of the water as it traveled. Its incredible size was said to be even longer than the vessel itself. Bill stared open-mouthed. As he recounted, the vessel and the creature actually did come very close to colliding, but apparently the animal had a clear destination in mind. It simply kept on traveling without acknowledging the vessel or looking left or right. Luckily for those on board, and it was not seen to submerge. Crew members followed it with their eyes as long as they were able to until it finally disappeared from sight. This did not sound like a crocodile to me, even a large one. When I pressed Bill for a better description, he stubbornly gathered his bearings and stated, "Well, it looked like a dinosaur. That's all there is to it. A dinosaur, I swear to it." This was especially chilling to me. My name is Dustin, and I grew up in a town called Cranbrook. It's in southeast British Columbia, in the Kootenays, the middle of nowhere. This story happened about 14 or 15 years ago, 2002 or 2003, with my 3 other friends, DB, PD, and SR. We were driving around the streets of Cranbrook like any other night. It was around 10 p.m. DB was driving his mom's car. SR was in the back seat behind him. PD was sitting passenger and I was behind him, if my memory is correct. We came to a stop on 2nd Street, crossing Cranbrook Street north to the 10 Book Forestry building. To our left, waiting to cross the crosswalk, stood a young boy who was wearing what looked like a hospital gown and seemed to be glowing. His gown, his skin, and his hair, all illuminated. As the boy began to cross, I recall him appearing to be an old man suddenly, still glowing. Once the figure was directly in front of the car, it was now an old, haggard Aboriginal woman. The gown and glow were gone and she was wearing layers of old tattered clothes. Once she got to the sidewalk, she collapsed, folded right over and fell to the ground. PD rolled down his passenger window and asked if she needed help. Her response was quick and very raspy and shrill. She said, "No, I don't. Call the police. No." You must have been in shock, or even just memorized by the incomprehension, because we just went to Safeway, which was open until 11 p.m., and called 911 on a payphone. By this point, we were in giddy frenzy trying to rationalize what we saw. It spiked our curiosities and imaginations. We were all about 18 and 19 years old then. When we went back to the intersection, the police were already there. The woman had made her way toward the 10 Beck building sitting against the brick wall. The police were approaching her, and she sat in the darkness. We drove off, and that was the last we heard of it or followed up with it. I often wonder what it could have happened. If the police called, did they offer help? What if we let her in the car, or even got her to the car for aid? What was it, an alien, a skinwalker, or a figment of collective imaginations? To this day, all 4 of us remember what we saw, and although certain details may differ in our stories, we all agree we witnessed something unexplainable. This happened well over 10 years ago, so I cannot provide dates, but my experience happened in Salt Fork, Ohio. I had forgotten about it for years until a silly television show jolted my memory. Now, the more I think on it and write on it, the more details I remember and the more intriguing it becomes to me. I became very excited after reading another member's story that sounds so similar to what I experienced that it sent chills down my spine. This is a post I made after reading a similar account by another member. and I am in the opinion that we experienced the same thing. So Swamp, here's my story. The first telling I wrote on here. I had just seen an Animal Planet cryptozoology episode that took place in the same remote area that I had my encounter. When I wrote my reaction in the comment box of the other members' experience, I was more focused on the details that surfaced from my memory than the first time I was told about that happened. So here's the second that I recall. It was late. We were sitting around the campfire, eating hot dogs and cleaning our rifles from a day's volley of rounds, when out of nowhere, this horrible, ear-piercing, aggressive scream came from the tree line, no more than 20 yards away. This thing was so loud that I could feel the vibrations of the sound waves go through my chest. It was just like being at a metal concert and being too close to the speakers. Whatever this thing was, it was angry, and it seemed directed at us. I am sure you are familiar with wildlife indigenous to your area, as in, you know the sounds they can make. I am also a veteran camper, and I know all of the sounds of the night brings from coyotes, owls, foxes, etc. Let me just say, this is like nothing I have ever heard, period. This was no coyote, fox, bear, owl, falcon, or etc. The three of us jolted up and instinctively pointed our rifles in the direction of the awful noise. I wanted to pull the trigger right then, but I was afraid things would go from bad to worse. My buddy Brian, voice shaking, goes, I'm going back to the car. We started slowly walking towards the car. I still had my Remington aimed steady at the group of trees, ready to fire. As I got a bit further away, I thought that maybe it would not follow us if we let off a shot or two. So I did. I fired 2 rounds into the dark woods. And just based on intuition alone, I think whatever made the sound was long gone. We made it to the car and sat inside, clutching rifles until daybreak. When we got back to the campsite, everything was how we left it. Nothing was missing or damaged. The three of us have never been so scared, and we haven't spoken since of the incident. So this happened a couple years ago. I was walking home from my work, and my road is a busy road, so it's busy with people and cars, and it was rush hour. Walking towards me from a distance was somebody wearing a black hoodie with the hood up. I noticed that something seemed to be wrong with their face. I didn't want to look at them too much and avoid being rude, but I couldn't help but noticing that they were walking in a hurried way and as if they did not want to be seen, keeping their head down. As I got closer to them, I couldn't resist getting a closer look. So I looked over to their face and it was almost completely blank. Like when you're editing a photo and you turn the brightness or contrast all the way up so all the facial features are gone apart from the eyes, mouth, and nose. This is what this person's face was. But instead of pure white, more the yellow white of the moon or magnolia paint. That's not all. When I looked at their face, religious images flooded in my mind of horror, evil, and hell. That was a total fist for me. I'm not a religious person at all. My mind got very bad vibes from what I had just seen. And something told me that I should forget about what I'd seen and not think about it again. Very unusual for me. I'm not usually a curious person, but I felt compelled to forget about this ASAP. So, I actually made an effort to not think about it, and didn't tell anyone about it until several weeks later when the emotions I felt were more faded. I don't think they just had a deformity or skin condition, because there was nothing there rather than something. And the emotions and images I got from looking at their face were unlike anything I've ever experienced. I wish I hadn't tried to forget it so instantly, as I might remember other things about it that could point to a more logical explanation or something else, whatever it may be.